Is Bieńkuńska. I'm from Statistical Office of Poland, Statistics Poland, and I would like to give you a short presentation of the content of the paper prepared together with my colleagues, Tomek Piasecki here, and Grażyna Marciniak. The main aim of the paper is to present the methods currently used by Statistics Poland to measure poverty and income inequality. We presented only the basic data on the scale of this phenomena in Poland, just to illustrate the applied methods. Comprehensive analysis of poverty and income inequalities is a topic for another article, another paper. In our paper, we devoted the most attention to measurement of social perception of poverty and income inequality. And this aspect is basically ignored in survey and analysis carried out by so-called official statistics. But in our opinion, it's an important element of social situation assessment. So we have decided to put questions on this subject in the social cohesion survey that we conducted generally every 4 years. The basis for analysis of poverty and income inequalities in Poland are the results of sample survey of households, such as household budget survey. It's a huge survey. The sample size is more than 30,000 households yearly, 38, 37, depends on the year. European Statistics on Income and Living Conditions Survey is harmonized surveys on the European level, and the Polish multidimensional social cohesion survey. I will start by presenting methods for measuring poverty. And the complexity of this phenomena makes us try to look at it from different perspectives. So we take into account both relative approach and absolute approach, subjective and objective. So let's start from monetary poverty, calculated on the basis of the household budget survey. And the synthetic measures of economic well-being is expenditure level. And we calculated the extent of the monetary poverty on the basis of the survey using different poverty lines. Relative poverty lines defined as at the level of 50% of average monthly household expenditure. The so-called legal poverty line, the application of the threshold allows to indicate a group of persons who are potentially entitled to apply for a cash benefit from social assistance. And the extreme of poverty line, the basis for determining the extreme poverty line is a subsistence minimum. So you can see the results. The most important indicators is extreme poverty rate. This indicator is used for social policy evaluation. But of course we are a member state of European Union. So if you know the one of the target Europe Strategy 2020 is to reduce poverty, and the indicators, the aim is measured by poverty and social exclusion indicator. Is aggregated indicator. Is defined. The indicator corresponding to the sum of persons who are at risk of poverty or severely material deprived or living in households with very low work intensity. Persons are only conducted once, even they are present in several sub-indicators. So You can see the results of the analysis conducted by using the indicators harmonized on the European level. But of course, it's possible to calculate another indicators. You can see the list complementary poverty indicators in Poland and the European Union based on a USILC survey. It is a persistence poverty rate after social survey, so, at risk of poverty rate before social transfer, and also at risk of poverty rate at fixed moment in time, because the reference year for monitoring strategy 2020 is the poverty line we use from 2008. You find, in our papers we find detailed definition of each indicators. And the results of USILC 2017 and 18 indicate that the risk of poverty and social exclusion index was about 90% in Poland, if you have seen in table 1. Relative poverty affected about 15% of people, while severe material deprivation rate at the time was about 5–6%. In the case of all the mentioned indicators, these values were lower than average for all EU member states, and much lower than the average for the European Union was also at risk of poverty rate at a fixed moment in time. It amounted 6%. It is mean that in comparison with 2008, there was a clear improvement in the income situation in Poland. But of course, monetary poverty is not. It's very important. It is very important to know the rate of monetary poverty. But but we use another approach in the context of multidimensional analysis of poverty. 3 complementary dimensions were taken into account: income poverty, living conditions poverty, and the poverty in terms of lack of budget balance. And income poverty, in this case, is defined similar to the main indicators used in European Union. So the households are considered poor if their monthly monetary disposable income with 12 months preceding a survey was lower than value considered as poverty threshold, defined at the 60% of median. Equalized income, of course, is used and the living condition poverty. The household are considered poor if they were affected by at least 10 of 30 symptoms of poor living standards. So we create aggregate indicator of poor living condition. The symptoms are related to the dwelling quality, equipment and durable goods, deprivation of different needs material as well as non-material. And the poverty in terms of the lack of budget balance, as the definition is, households are considered poor in terms of this type of poverty if they are affected by at least 4 of 7 symptoms included. The symptoms refers to the both household subjective opinion about the material status as well as the facts concerning budgetary difficulties, including lack of possibility to pay rent, etc. It is possible, of course, to analyze overlapping of all 3 poverty forms and this indicator is treated as a multi-dimensional poverty indicator. So this is very short description of our approach to so-called objective poverty measure, but we also want to know what society, ordinary people, thinks about poverty. And for this purpose, we use our national survey, social cohesion survey. And the social cohesion survey from 2011 showed that opinion on the extent of poverty in Poland are very diverse. And the most frequently indicated assessment of the extent of poverty range from 16 to 30%, but it is much more than objective measure indicate. But we also know what people think about the role of the state in poverty reduction. We put to the question, you can see, do you think that material support for people living in poverty is a task for the state, a family, or both the institution? You can see that more than 60% of people think that it is mainly task for the state. 30% is mainly task for the state, and approximately 28 more for the state than for a family. And we also, over the 1/3, believe that it is a task both for the state and the family. And what people think about the most desirable forms of social assistance for the poor? We put the questions to our survey. The most based on the our analysis concerned the results, the answer for the questions. Taking your place of residence into consideration, city, town, village, what kind of assistance is most needed for persons living there who would consider as living in poverty ones? Three possible indicators was three possible indicators. The index you can choose three forms of the most important forms of social assistance. So you can see the results. The most needed form of assistance to people living in poverty was to help find a job. But the form of social service also very important. The preferred form of support is mainly assistance in the care of chronically ill and disabled people, increasing the availability of free medical services, and assistance in running a household for elderly. A cash benefit are considered as one of three most important forms of support by approximately 16% of persons in general. There are not too big discrepancies in expectation concerning assistance for the poor between the general population and people affected by income poverty. And only in the cash, in the case of cash benefits, such differences is more visible. Cash benefits is considered one of the three most important forms of assistance by approximately 24% of persons defined as the poor according to the income computation. To the income, that is 8 percentage points more than among the general population. Okay, we have not enough time, so maybe we start with income inequalities. You can see the main source for analyzing the results, the main source for inequality of income analysis is used here. You can see, we use such indicators as Gini coefficient, income equality share ratio, and for national welfare state index also. But we analyze also the income inequality using another survey, for instance, social cohesion survey. We receive very similar the value of indicators when we compare the data from these two surveys. And it's very important since the composition of the objective income inequalities measure. So maybe we have enough time. You can results of the composition of tail index. You can see that the most important factor for explanation the total inequality in Poland is the education and economic activity. But as was mentioned at the beginning, we would like to know what is the social perception of income inequality. So we put this question: please specify what is your attitude towards the statement the income differences in Poland are too great. You receive that. We receive we can see that majority, 87% of Polish citizens aged 16 and over, believe that the differences in income in Poland were too great. But also questions about the role of the state in the creation of income policy in total egalitarian views of Polish residents of the distribution income. In 2011, almost 78% of people aged 16 and over agree with the opinion that it is the state responsible to reduce differences between high and low income. And approximately 78% of people believe that the state should ensure a basic minimum income for everyone. So it's possible to analyze also the coexistence of three egalitarian opinions. We see that 66% of Polish society, in the view of the 66% of our society, income differences in Poland are too great, and the people say also that reducing the differences between high and low income is responsible of the state, and the ensuring a minimum income for everyone is the responsibility of the state. So it is really this part of population have a strong egalitarian views on the state policy on income redistribution. We analyze determinants. Okay, so we analyze determinants of perception of income inequality in Poland. You can see the results. I would like to put attention on the most important determinants, region. Okay, so because it is very important determinants, we use. You can see the list of determinants. We use very typical determinants like region, type of locality, but also the most untypical, like level of religious commitment, of type of life pathway, so trajectory of life, etc. So we can read about this. And we analyze also perception of inequality versus actual income level inequalities on the regional basis. So you can see we find that the research question was posed concerning whether the greater aversion to income inequalities in some regions is the result of the greater intensity of the phenomena in these regions, or whether it is determined by a worse income situation. And in general, the lack of we can say that in general, the lack of acceptance of income inequalities was greater in regions with a lower level of income and a relatively low level of inequality than in voivodeship with high values of income inequality index, but relatively higher level of income. And final remarks, generally the complex of poverty and the fact that it is linked to practical action in the social policy sphere means that the application of several methods of its measurement enables a more complete diagnosis of this poverty, of this problem, and you can see that using a single measure or just one family of measures methods may cause some effects to be overlooked at weakening the certainty of conclusions. And of course, in our opinion, subjective measures of poverty and income should complement the so-called objective indicators. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank you first for inviting me to comment on this paper. So the paper generally puts a comprehensive picture of approaches used by Statistics Poland to measure poverty and inequality in both, basically in objective terms, but also discusses the ways it is possible to measure public opinion about these issues, and also provides an analysis of determinants of public views on inequality. So my first comment would be that indeed this is a paper written by people who actually gather data, and you probably know the best about these sources, and you could give us more details about, as I call it, kitchen of data production, because you are probably the only people who know how it is done from the inside. So I think this can enrich your text a lot. So I put several ideas of what this can be. First, because you analyze long periods of time, maybe there was some methodological changes. I noticed some spike on the graph, so I would actually think it comes from some methodological change, because it was only for one indicator, but others were more or less flat. Then what is going on with data quality, what's about non-responses and how you deal with it, the two sources that you use, the Household Budget Survey and EU Silk, use different welfare measures, as I understood. So it is interesting to have a discussion of what are the principles of choice of the measure for welfare, for poverty analysis, and because you used both, so what advantages and disadvantages you see for these measures in the context of Poland. Also, because you use many various indicators, and of course, many more approaches exist, especially for public opinion. So this is very interesting how you actually choose the indicator that you measure. So why you choose this formulation of question. So probably you had some tests before. So this all would be really interesting to know how this works. As for objective poverty, so this is more a descriptive part where you describe the methodologies, but it would also, even in the context of such a descriptive paper, maybe it could be discussed what different aspects of poverty are captured by different indicators. Maybe an easy way to do this is to compare the profiles of the poor, so who fall into these groups of poor according to different definitions, to make us understand how actually how we can use these indicators. Yeah? So what do we get by using different indicators? I find very interesting the results about perceptions of poverty, and so this is, so you acknowledge that 30% are unable to estimate, so I'm interested if these were just refusals or there was a special answer, I don't know, because I've seen a number of surveys that ask different opinions about social reality, and very often we look at the data and people usually don't know what's going on, and sometimes we can understand that people are just guessing by answering these questions. So having such an option is indeed important, and this is very interesting to see that you probably have such answer, and people actually can choose it, and so for those who really answer, we can think that we have better results, so they were not just guessing. Yeah, so this result that you have, that people tremendously overestimate poverty, this is in line with other literature on the matter. So the part about determinants of perceptions of income inequality, well, when you describe the variables that you use to describe, as a determinants in regression, you lack theoretical parts, so you don't put any general theoretical hypothesis. For example, reference group hypothesis, this is very common in the literature to explain how people form their perceptions. Also, I find that political view would be a very important factor, explaining people's opinions if inequality is high or low. So if you have such question, I would include it as an explanatory variable. Also, you discuss that material conditions are not that important, but isn't it just a collinearity issue because you use 3 different determinants and probably they are correlated, and this would drive significance and also the magnitudes down for each of them. Also, I see that regions are very important, and so my question would be if the monetary income is adjusted for cost of living, because part of this importance of regions may be just a result of not adjusting for cost of living if you don't do this. And finally, just to support the importance of work that is done by a statistical agency. So from various, so I think now this is quite fastly developing field of literature, so how people actually perceive economic reality, and many different papers show that people know very poorly the true state, for example, of income inequality. Probably this is a quite complicated and abstract notion. So experimental studies show that if you actually provide this information to people, this affects their views. For example, to redistribution policies, how much of redistribution they want. So, from the side of statistical authority, this shows how it is important for any statistical authority not just to gather data, but also to inform public about the results. To let people make informed decisions. So thank you very much. This is about
Thank you for your comments. I agree almost with everything. It was mentioned in the beginning, it was just short, very short presentation of the methods. So, of course, your suggestions are very useful. We know that this lack of description of methodology of our survey, etc. So, of course, we published a book, special publication on poverty, and which we try to explain much more than in this paper. But if of course, we can prepare much more detailed explanation, methodological issue, etc. So, concerning model,
Determinants and models.
Yeah.
I think, remark was about political view. We don't have such an information in our survey. Yes, it would be very interesting, but also somehow risky, I think, to ask about it by official
statistics.
Yes.
It's possible to use data from public opinion survey. They put this kind of question, but in our approach, we try to be, we are independent institution, but we try very neutral in some aspects.
But
so
it would be very interesting, and I think we see some effects. Okay, we don't research it. But we can guess it is some effect also connected with political view. If we see regional differences, we can guess there are some effects of political view also, or the political view may be correlated with some phenomena which are also correlated with the perception of inequality. And correlation between explanatory variables, yes, we are aware of it, and it also. But we in other researches we also some we check how correlated they are. So these kinds of poverty are correlated, but not very strongly. And correction about costs, living costs. We explain inequality, but inequality perception. I think it is not so. If we explain objective poverty, we of course we take into account the differences in the living costs, because but here I don't know if he's important. Maybe it is, but we don't take it into account in this research.
So for publication, of course, it's necessary to put much more detailed methodological explanation. We agree, and we put, of course, because we know the literature, of course, especially Eurobarometer survey, for example, covering this aspect. So it's a lot of survey concerning the social perception of this poverty provided by different institutes, and so we know, and I think we prepared. We will try to improve our article before publishing anyway. Thank you very much for your comments once again.
Just a comment. You have a very specific way of defining multidimensional poverty. You said concurrence, which is an intersection approach. And obviously you find a very small percentage, if I remember well. Yeah. 4%. I think you should also give, the other extreme union approach, where you would define as poor if you are poor in any of these three domains: income poverty, living condition, lack of budget balance, or probably even better, some intermediate approach like the Untitled Chapter. Because of the fact that you have a very small concurrence of poverty means that you are really looking at three different aspects of poverty. Otherwise, it would be a much higher percentage.
Okay, can I answer? Okay, okay, thanks for your comments. Generally, we take into account many aspects, because when we analyze living conditions, we take not only different aspects of possibility having holiday and go to the doctor and many aspects. So it's not also dwelling condition, etc. So we take into account 30 items. So it's not just one question about bad or good living condition, but it is another
intersection approach.
Yeah. But I know very well the Alkiri methods, but I'm not agree with all with this concept. Because why? Because in many cases they are put together determinants and symptoms of poverty. For instance, the unemployment, etc. I'm not sure. So it's rather
Just said you
think I understand. So maybe we should write more about the idea and explain that, because this method you mentioned was rather multidimensional social exclusion indicator rather than poverty in the context of Alkiri indicators. So.